Does the honourable member understand that it's all very well for us to say, well, we feel strong and we can withstand this and you can criticise and you can offend and we'll stand up to you. But we, her and I, are not Muslims living in a country where there is already a rise in Islamophobia. And comments like that from somebody who has such influence over so many people and is getting so much media exposure over it can only harm people, not like us, people living out there on the street feeling vulnerable, not feeling as strong as she and her constituents are claiming to feel.
I can only give the honourable member the reassurance that as someone who used to prosecute criminals for a living before I came to this place, any defendant who tried that on in court would get very short shrift from me and I'm sure from the jury. And the point is that we mustn't allow people who behave in that disgraceful way, we mustn't allow such criminals, people who beat up other people on the basis of their religion or their beliefs, we mustn't allow them to somehow remove themselves from that by blaming someone in a different continent. If they beat a Muslim up on the streets of Britain, that is their responsibility and no one else's. Now, one of the values I think that best sums up our country, of course, includes the freedom to exchange thoughts and ideas within the law. The freedom to persuade or to rebut. The freedom to inspire or to eviscerate in argument. The freedom to speak and the freedom to listen. Now, this freedom is not always comfortable. Indeed, my honourable friends for South Dorset and Tunbridge and Morling have already referred to the rising problem, it seems, of some of our universities fearing to allow free speech, providing safe spaces for fear that people may be offended. But the freedom of speech must mean that sometimes we are going to be offended. It means allowing those whose views we hold to be unedifying to speak their minds. And it also, crucially, means the freedom to reply, to say, no, Donald Trump, you are wrong, and you are wrong for the following reasons. That freedom was hard won over centuries and must be defended jealously because it goes to the very essence of democracy and the rule of law. Now, members opposite may rely on the argument of consistency. Indeed, one member already has, saying, well, so-and-so's been excluded and so Mr. Trump must be excluded. Well, let us remind ourselves about the threshold that must be met for this to happen. The Home Secretary must conclude that the person's presence in the United Kingdom is not conducive to the public good. The House of Commons Library very helpfully provided a briefing note for this debate, and in which it provides 14 examples of people who had been excluded by Labour Home Secretaries by May 2009. Of those 14 examples, 10 were considered to be engaging in unacceptable behaviour by seeking to foment, justify or glorify terrorist violence. 9 were considered to be engaging in unacceptable behaviour in order to provoke others to commit terrorist act or serious crime. 5 were considering to be fostering hatred which might lead to inter-community violence in the UK. And 1 had spent 30 years in prison for killing 4 soldiers and a 4-year-old girl. I ask a simple question of those who would ban Donald Trump. Are you really saying that his conduct, no matter how offensive, that his conduct meets this same criteria? I won't, thank you, I'll move on. If, and it is a big if Donald Trump poses any question for us as a country, the answer is not to fuel his publicity by banning him, which, incidentally, this debate is already doing nicely. The answer is to rebut his arguments. I'll finish my point then. The answer is to challenge him in a robust democratic argument about why he is wrong about the contribution of American and British Muslims to this country. I'll give way.
I know the honourable member cites 14 cases of people who were banned. Has the honourable member considered the 84 hate preachers in total who were banned? Because the honourable member would see that there is a striking resemblance between what Donald Trump is saying and 2 of the bloggers who were banned 2 years ago by the Conservative Home Secretary. And will the honourable member comment on whether the same should be applied to Donald Trump?
Well, no, forgive me. I've already given the House of Commons briefing note, as I think most people accept, is a neutral document. Those are their examples. I have used every single one of the 14 examples given. And as I say, they are in a very, very different category from the category of Donald Trump saying, as he has done, on this issue and on many others. But I'll deal, if I may, finally, with the point that Sir Edward, my honourable friend and neighbour, raised. Ted Cruz, in the recent Republican debate, accusing Donald Trump of having New York values. Well, I can assure both of them that they would be enriched by the values of my constituents in New York and beyond, who are hardworking, generous and welcoming, and who may well be rather bemused that we are fueling this man's publicity machine by having this debate at all today. Thank you, Sir Roger.
Azmina Ahmed Sheikh.
Thank you, Sir Roger. It's a pleasure indeed to serve under your chairmanship. Donald Trump's comments that he would ban Muslim men, women and children from entering the USA if he were to be elected as president were almost universally condemned as racist and offensive. And I absolutely welcome the condemnation that his statement has received from all sides of the House and indeed both sides of this debate, and that members of the public have decided that this issue is serious and merits parliamentary scrutiny in relation to the debate that we're having today. Mr. Trump's announcement into subsequent remarks condemn a whole religion for the actions of a terrorist death cult. Mr. Trump also condemns and speaks in derogatory terms, I should say, women, people with disabilities, Mexicans. The list is non-exhaustive because it is never ending. And Donald Trump is not just wrong. His comments are indeed dangerous and his views must be tackled seriously. Donald Trump's words confirm... Yes, of course.
Thank you, Sir Roger. Does the Honourable Lady not think that Mr. Trump might well be making these comments, not only because he thinks they're true, but because he wants to get lots of publicity to help his election campaign?
I thank the honourable member for his intervention. I don't think it is for me or us to try and get into the mind of Donald Trump, but I think it would be very important if members here would understand what it's like to be a Muslim living in this country when we're facing comments made by people like Mr. Trump, where people take on board what he's saying as being genuine concerns about the whole of those of us who practice the Muslim faith. It's a very uncomfortable place to be in, and I would hope that the member would accept my personal experience in that respect. Mr. Trump condemns my family. The ridiculous situation he has created means that in similar vein, he condemns the political editor of Sky News, the chief executive of Tate & Lyle, and some of our greatest Olympians. He condemns the leaders of Bahrain, UAE and Jordan for the actions of those terrorists they are currently working together to overcome in Iraq and Syria. Because, Mr. Chairman, we are all Muslims. That, for him, is the one and only common denominator. And rather than combating the serious issue of international terrorism, Trump's statement has bolstered the twisted narrative promoted by the terrorist cult Daesh and others that pits the West against the Muslim faith. He's fueled racial tensions across the world while undermining the national security of both the US and the UK, and indeed, in the words of the Pentagon spokesman Peter Cook, who said at the time that that statement was made by Mr. Trump, anything that bolsters ISIL's narrative and pits the United States against the Muslim faith is certainly not only contrary to our values, but contrary to our national security. As he threatens, Mr. Chairman, the national security of our friends in the USA, he threatens too our own security. Since her appointment as Home Secretary in 2010, Theresa May has already banned hundreds of individuals from the UK. Her job, quite correctly, is to protect public safety and promote our security. She has already explicitly excluded 84 people for hate speech. Under her judgment, my view is that Donald Trump should be number 85. Using the powers vested in her, Theresa May has excluded people who have included serious criminals, far-right extremists, homophobic extremists, and these rules should be applied consistently and equally to all, because if they exist for that very reason, and we have a responsibility for peace and security to ensure that whoever comes in and out of our country is treated in the same way. Now, I am very, very proud that the Scottish Government has taken a lead and removed Trump's status as a global Scot ambassador. And in terms of questions of hypocrisy, perhaps it's an important forum for me today to confirm that his global Scot ambassador state was bestowed upon him by a former Labour administration. Let that myth be dispelled here and now. But the same thing would apply. I don't think anyone, any genuine person, could possibly have envisaged that this man would make such horrendous comments. The UK government now need to demonstrate their commitment to promoting religious harmony by applying their own rules consistently in this case. Now, I understand the argument being made by some that we should educate Mr. Trump, we should invite him here so he can see for himself how to build bridges with the Muslim community rather than putting up barriers. This is a man who seeks to be President of the United States of America, and we think we need to educate him. We should be very worried if a man lacking in such education seeks to lead a nation. Absolutely, I just wanted to finish my sentence. Of course.
Making a powerful speech, but can I not suggest that actually this is about buffoonery, and ultimately buffoonery should not be met with the blunt instrument of a ban, but with the classic British response of ridicule?
I thank the member for his intervention, and it is within the gift of the British state about which he speaks to deal with Mr. Trump in the same manner as we've dealt with other people. And I accept that you have referred to Mr. Trump's buffoonery, but I have to say that his remarks are condemning an entire religion of faith which I practice. And it may be difficult for people to understand how that affects us, but it does, because he's talking about me, he's talking about my family, he's talking about my children. That is what Mr. Trump's talking about. It is worthy of note, however, that Mr. Trump's policy would make it impossible for me or other Muslim friends of America to travel to his country to make the same case there that we are making here. This Parliament can be extremely proud of its improving record in electing strong Muslim MPs across this House to represent their constituents' interests. But Mr. Trump would ban the new members for Ealing Central and Acton, Hampstead and Kilburn, Wealdon, Bradford West and Bradford East from entering the USA and allowing us to make our case there. I've heard others say that it would only add to Mr. Trump's notoriety to apply our rules consistently in his case. It would raise his profile. Now, anyone who's followed the race for the Republican nomination for president will know that lack of profile is not an issue for Mr. Trump. The American people have a very important decision to make this year about who they want to lead their country, and I am sure they will make the right choice, and it is their decision to make. Mr. Chairman, last week, Mr. Trump added insult to injury by stating he will withdraw his investment in 2 Scottish golf courses if he's subject to the same type of travel restrictions he advocates for others. However, contrary to his own assertions, Mr. Trump is bad for business. It's already clear that the Royal and Ancient will not include Turnberry on the open rota while still owned by Trump, costing the local economy dearly, while his work to actively undermine a vital offshore renewables investment in the North Sea may have serious repercussions in developing Scotland as a world leader in this emerging technology. Donald Trump has provided succour to terrorists and promoted racial hatred on both sides of the Atlantic. He has, of course, a right to be wrong, but his statements are dangerous and threaten our public safety and national security. We cannot have laws which are applied differently depending on people's income, public profile, religion, or colour. What does that say about us? Our rules and laws must be applied consistently for all. The Home Secretary needs to apply her own judgment consistently in this case, and that is what I am calling upon her to do, and looking forward to hearing from the Minister in his response. Mr. Chairman, anything else would be unprincipled and quite simply wrong.